Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Stellium Astrology podcast. I am Stephanie James, the founder of StelliumAstrology.com, the hostess with the mostess on this podcast, and I used to write horoscopes for a number of publications including Elle magazine, and I now teach the odd class here or there for the London School of Astrology. And I have a Patreon page which you may be interested in subscribing to, with a couple of different tiers for you to figure out which is most effective for you and your personal investment at this time in your life, where I'm beginning to add resources and little bits and bobs for you. I have just recently to the Patreon page added all the new moons and full moons of 2021. I've literally just cast a chart for them. I just thought, it would be really useful, for some of you guys who are interested in looking at the moon, to actually be able to have a list of the charts. Now, I know that everybody's in different countries, so the time zones change. However, the important thing to recognise is that the charts that I've cast are for the UK, and I've put a little link in there so you can convert the time of the lunation to your local time. You should have all the information that you need, and if anything, if you're not really bothered, if you already know the time of the lunation and you just want to look at the chart of the moment, what I do is I never actually look at the midheaven or the ascendant usually. For me, it's depending on if you've cast it for your local area. So say I was actually casting it for where I live, then I would look at the ascendant and the midheaven and how it fed into my chart. But if I was looking at it as a general thing, like when I'm interpreting it for you guys on the Patreon page, I don't look at the ascendant or midheaven, because that just really is a very time and location sensitive to where you are in the world, and it's not really like a hugely informative point. The full moons and the new moons really affect us all. So like I said, if you were actually looking at how it really fed into you, you could say, I think actually there's one in July which happens on a relatively poignant date for me. We'll find out how poignant when it actually gets to it. I think it's the full moon. Yeah, the full moon is at 18 Capricorn, which is basically on my sun. And I think that that happens to be setting in the chart. So, for my location, for me, it feeds very much into me and my specific location. However, it's still going to be an 18-degree Capricorn full moon. So, you can still enjoy looking at that and looking at all the aspects and everything. And I'm providing videos and sort of explaining aspects and everything to that anyway. And just one observation that I noticed, we are getting 2 Aquarius moons this year, new moons, but no Cancer new moon this year, which I thought was interesting. So, basically we are having 2 new moons in, is that right? Or is it full moons? I can't remember now. Either way, I had a look and I thought, well, that's interesting. What a strange phenomena. It does happen from time to time. It just means there's a lot of extra Aquarius energy. And as lots of my Patreon subscribers are aware at the moment, we are having a very airy year. I'm sure I've mentioned that to you guys as well, which is handy because I'm full of air. I've got a lot of air, and so I can just continue to gas on this podcast. So just an FYI, I've got an interview going up on my Patreon page. It may already be up there by the time this episode comes out. I just did an interview recently with a good friend and colleague of mine, Fernanda Paiva, who I respect very much as an astrologer, and we basically had a look at a few things, themes in the natal chart, and talked about her journey into astrology, the master's degree that she's studying in astrology, if anybody's interested in that sort of thing. We had a really interesting conversation, which I think you guys would be interested to check out. I am actually putting that on my Patreon page as kind of like an early preview, because that's not actually going to come out for you guys until a little bit further down the line, when we do our when I've worked through some of the more structured basics that I wanted to work through. So that said, I will provide a link to my Patreon page in the description. But today we're talking about the houses, really. And we're looking at, we're looking at the first house in the Ascendant, and quite possibly going to be talking about the seventh house as well, because you can't really talk about the first house without the seventh house. It's they're kind of like a tag team. They look like separate points in the chart because they're opposite, just like all the houses: the second and the eighth, the third and the ninth, the fourth and the 10th, fifth and the 11th, and the 6th and the 12th. They are all opposites, but actually they have an interplay with each other, which is a very interesting concept, because astrology is just an unfolding mystery of interlinking, interconnecting, multifaceted levels and layers of meaning that just continually fascinate and perplex the individual exploring in equal measure, and that never really stops. I don't think. I don't know any astrologer who isn't still fascinated by astrology. Otherwise, why would we still be doing it? I just don't know. So, anyway, let's look at the houses. There is one other thing I meant to say about my Patreon page, actually. I have actually decided to factor in a discount for people that subscribe. So my BFFs get a 15% discount and my VIPs get a 25% discount on any of my services that I provide. Just an FYI for you there. But let's get into the Ascendant and the rising sign, really. And I have a few books that I think are really useful for you. We've got keywords for astrology. I recommended this in the last episode. Don't know if you caught the last episode. I won't be covering the same stuff as I did last time. But yeah, this book is really good. I strongly recommend it for beginners. And anybody really. I think this is a good book. I used to use it a lot when I wrote my horoscopes for Elle and for everywhere, basically. It was one of the books that I took everywhere with me, because it was a really good prompt for me when I was having a bit of a mind blank. And sometimes you just have to read over something and think, yes, actually that's good. Reconnect with that aspect that you're struggling to bring into your kind of vocabulary, or bring into some sort of meaningful communication. It can really jog the memory. So I've got this book, Keywords for Astrology, which I absolutely love, and I probably use it the most. What's annoying about this book is not the contents or anything. It's the fact that just after I bought this book, my sister knocked a glass of red wine over it. So my book has always looked really old and tatty, even when it was brand new. But you know what? I like that worn look, so it's kind of cool. Anyway, so in this book, it says the Ascendant is the sign of the zodiac that was rising on the eastern horizon at the time of birth. The time and place of birth determine which sign this is. Interesting that it's about the time of birth, because actually when you are born, the minute you're born, the second you're born, and there are some discrepancies over whether or not it's when you cut the umbilical cord, or whether it's when you get smacked on the bum and take your first breath, or whatever. Essentially the moment of the Ascendant is the moment that you entered the world. So whatever's rising on the horizon, this is why it's so important to kind of know your birth time. And it's such a shame when you just don't know it, or you can't find it out for whatever reason. Charts can be rectified if you have a rough idea. We can figure out your rising sign and your rising degree by looking at other time indicators in the chart. However, if you're fortunate enough to be able to know your ascendant time or degree, or even just the sign, really, the sign that happens to be rising, that can also be quite handy. So basically, think about being born. So the 12th house, which is above the Ascendant, which is the area of cloudy, nebulous, watery, womb-like, all-encompassing, collective, dreamy, non-clear, intangible existence, is kind of like that womb territory. And then when you pop out into the world, pop, there you go, nice and easy. Suddenly you're alive and screaming and crying and looking for nourishment. And the Ascendant describes your basically your first experience of the world. It can describe the way you entered the world. So it could be that you might have like Mars Uranus rising, and if you or Mars Uranus in the first house even. And if that was the case, then it could be that you were delivered by cesarean section because there was some kind of sudden emergency, or maybe Pluto rising, similar type of thing. There could have been some kind of crisis, and it was a very touch and go type of thing. All sorts of things. Maybe if Saturn was rising, it could have been that it was a very long drawn out process, a long labour, maybe something like that. So it's quite it can tell a story. The Ascendant can tell a story before we've even looked at the rest of the chart. And without reading this book verbatim, it also says the sign of the Ascendant represents the way in which you spontaneously approach your surrounding world and the basic mood and manner with which you start something new. It also describes the experience that you had with your birth, as I was saying. This can be a fighting nature, Aries or Mars, or reserved and hesitant, Capricorn, Saturn. In the truest sense of the word, this could be a matter of life and death, Scorpio, Pluto. Oh, how funny. I mentioned this. Or a liberating experience, Aquarius, Uranus. So that's interesting, isn't it? So the Ascendant, according to the keywords for astrology, I mean, that's just, there's a whole few pages, and then it goes into each Ascendant sign in this book as well, telling you about what Aries Ascendant's like, Taurus, Gemini. I was just looking, I've got a Gemini Ascendant, so we've got Aries Ascendant, image, I am the first. Taurus Ascendant, image, I am good-natured and stable. Gemini Ascendant, I know everything. I have a Gemini Ascendant. Feeling towards life, what I don't know bothers the hell out of me. I can relate to that. It's a great book, like I said a million times. You definitely should invest. Another book that's really good is Sue Tompkins' Contemporary Astrologer's Handbook. And what she says about the first house and Ascendant is that any planets conjunct the Ascendant, and to a lesser extent, any planet falling within the first house, the sign on the Ascendant, the ruler of the Ascendant, these are all really important things. This is a kind of the Ascendant complex that she talks about. So this is what we need to take into consideration. So we might say, for example, somebody I know has Cancer rising with Moon on the Ascendant, but she also has a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Cancer in her first house as well. So that all is part of almost really her Ascendant and first house complex. That's all part of it. Somebody else you might look at, I'll use myself as an example just because it's easy and I can just say it. Gemini rising, I don't have anything in my first house. I do have the North Node in my first house, but we won't really go into that for now. And I have Mercury rules Gemini. So Mercury is my chart ruler, makes it very important. And that happens to be sitting in the 8th house in Aquarius in conjunction with Venus. So you'd look at that planet that rules the Ascendant as quite an important planet. So, yes, she also says the Ascendant or rising sign will often make a general statement, while its ruler will qualify and make that statement more specific. So remember, I said something like, what I don't know bothers the hell out of me, and I want to know everything as a Gemini rising person. But my Mercury happens to be in the house of mysteries, which means that there are things that I'm going to be drawn to that I'm never going to get to the bottom of, and that's probably an area of extreme frustration, but also fascination, because I just have to keep exploring. So yes, and then any aspects to the Ascendant axis, especially if the birth time is accurate and the aspect is a tight one. So yes, any planets that aspect your Ascendant, that can speak to you. Well, it can speak to you as well. I happened to be looking at Meghan Markle's chart the other day. I wonder why. Gosh, why would I randomly pick Meghan Markle? She's been everywhere, really talked about so much ever since she got into the royal family. But now look at this whole Oprah thing. But yeah, she's got. I've been looking at Lilith a lot lately as well. She's not that Lilith is a planet, but to look at Lilith, she's got Lilith at 24 degrees of Scorpio, and her ascendant is 24 degrees Cancer. So that's very tight, a very tight trine. And I happen to think she's playing out a bit of a Lilith kind of archetype at the moment. But also, I think she's got Uranus at about 27 of Scorpio, which also is not super duper tight, but it's not that wide either. It's only sort of 3 degrees off of her ascendant as well. So there's this kind of Uranian kind of being ostracized type of thing from the family, this Cancer rising thing. So it's an interesting, her chart's so interesting actually to look at. But yes, so the ascendant is really how we approach life. And it can also describe not just the birth, but also like early experiences of childhood. And it's really kind of how we see the world, kind of like our persona, how we dress ourselves, how we go out into the world. Now, let me just pull up my my little slides that I've got. Oh, I've got a bit of a... you know when you get like... I really need a massage. It's been a while. I haven't been able to get a massage for ages, and I used to try and get one once a month. And now I need somebody to massage out the crunchiness in my shoulders. Yes, so with the first house, it's almost like your point of view. It's your perspective. It's the way we see the world. So seeing the world through different lenses, you know, starting with Aries, perhaps, you know, looking at the world as everything's a challenge or something to be, you know, there's goals to be achieved and you want to be the best at what you do. And then, you know, with Taurus, perhaps Taurus rising approaches the world of, you know, how to accumulate, you know, a kind of sense of security around them, how to build something, how to establish some foundations. You know, that's kind of like their kind of modus operandi. Like I said with Gemini, everything's got to be, there's a lesson to be learned, or there's something to be learned with everything. There's a curiosity about approaching life. And with where are we going next? Cancer rising, you know, perhaps you know, it's about, you know, caring and being helpful and, you know, being of assistance to people in some way. You know, often very maternal figures, they just naturally, you know, take on people that they can look after. With Leo, perhaps life is a performance. There's a, you know, the world is a stage, and you know, they need to go out and establish what makes them special, you know, and their, you know, display their creative gift. Virgo, again, is another kind of like helpful sign. The world is somewhere that they need to kind of, in order to process, they need to be able to make sense of things. And, you know, like with Gemini, there's choices that need to be made, but with Virgo, it's about discerning and kind of figuring out, you know, how to go about things in the most logical way, really. And also, you know, to be able to help, to serve, to... you know, it's not the most egotistical of signs, Virgo, but yeah, there's an element of critique about it. And when I say discrimination, they have to sort of discriminate what's the best for them and what's not. And then we find ourselves at Libra. Now, obviously, you can have Libra rising, but Libra also happens to be the sign opposite Aries. And Aries is the first, kind of like the first sign, well, it is the first sign of the zodiac, but it sits, if you're looking at the wheel, the horoscope wheel, Aries tends to sit at the first house and Libra sits at the seventh house. And as we know, Aries is a kind of self-focused, self-driven, very motivated sign of the zodiac. And then opposite is Libra, which is very other person orientated. They're very focused on relationships. They're very interested in other people. We've got a fire sign, and we have, you know, a very inspirational fire sign, and then we have a very, you know, social air sign that wants to be around other people, interacting, learning a lot about themselves through their interactions. So you can have Libra rising, and, you know, relationships will hold a level of importance, and, you know, aesthetics and beauty, balance and harmony. You know, all of these different signs of the zodiac, as they progress, have their own way of looking at the world. So and not just, it's not just the sign that we're looking at when it's rising. We also have to look at the mode, and we have to look at the elements. So, you know, whenever somebody who has, for example, a Gemini ascendant enters a challenging period in their life, it's probably not going to be their knee jerk to stay put and see what happens. They're probably going to think, I need to move, I need to change, I need to weigh up my options, I need to see what's available to me, because at the moment I'm struggling with this situation. So somebody with Gemini rising might suddenly, if they're having a bit of a bad time at work, rather than just patiently waiting it out and thinking I can stick at this, they may apply for a bunch of other jobs, just fire out a load of CVs everywhere and then just see what comes back to them, and then they start somewhere new. You know, it's just like a natural kind of way of dealing with a difficult situation is to kind of sidestep it and go elsewhere. That's very mutable. And airy might be, you know, that they have to do something where they have to communicate their issues, they have to talk about it, they need to vent. Whereas somebody with a fixed ascendant, maybe Taurus ascendant, for example, will, you know, they have challenges, but instead of thinking, right, I'm going to change, I'm going to move, they probably think, well, I've already put down a lot of work and effort here, there's a lot of history with this, I'm building something, and I know that I've got more to contribute, so I'm going to stay put and I'm going to see what happens, because they're much more fixed about the way that they go about it. So remember to look at your elements and your modes, and if you haven't listened to those shows, I highly recommend you do, because they, like I've said a million times, the modes and the elements are so essential to understanding the signs of the zodiac. And you know, it's great to think, yes, what's fixed and what's mutable and what's cardinal, and you know, thinking about what earth, air, fire and water kind of mean, or how they kind of work. But actually, when you're looking at a rising sign and you're trying to really think about what motivates that person, and as you think about the first house and the ascendant being a complex and all-encompassing and most important part of the chart, I must say, you know, the fact that I've left it until this point to talk about the ascendant is really kind of stupid. I should have probably gone into the ascendant very early on, because we've done now what we would call the big three. We've done the sun and the moon, which are really, really important. But here we go with the third part of the big three, the ascendant. So it's so important to cover the ascendant and understand where these people are coming from, what they're doing, because it talks about who they are, their early life, their birth story, how they kind of spontaneously interact with their environment. You know, when something falls in their path, what do? The ascendant is kind of almost how they're driving their car. I think, what was the analogy? Oh, here we are. Oh my gosh. Okay, so here we go. So Sue in her book has put the sun, moon and ascendant, quick pointers to their differences. Imagine life as a journey. The sun is the driver, the moon is the passenger or baggage, and the ascendant is the vehicle or the journey that they take. Or we've got the sun, where I need to go, the moon, where I am coming from, and ascendant, the way that I'm going. So perhaps you could see it like that. You could see it as the sun being where you're going, the moon where you are coming from, what's happened previously and what's sort of inspired you to make this journey. And then as far as the ascendant's concerned, it could even be the way that you plot your journey, you know, exactly where you think you want to go, how you want to attack it. Do you want to do it by foot? Do you want to do it in a car? Do you want to do it on train? Are you going to use Google Maps, or are you going to use an A to Z? That kind of thing. So again, this is a great book, The Contemporary Astrologer's Handbook. The first house and ascendant is on page 250, and then it goes into all the planets in the houses and stuff. It's a cookbook style textbook with a lot of different things to, you know, if you had to only own one astrology book, and it's really difficult for me to know which to recommend out of these two, but I would say probably the Contemporary Astrologer's Handbook for starting off is probably one of the better ones, just because it covers things in a way that it's got so many little bits that you can refer to, little cookbooky bits that you can sort of like pick and choose aspects, you can pick and choose. But then having said that, keywords for astrology is also good in that respect. I just feel like Contemporary Astrologer's Handbook has it a little bit of a I think it's just a bit more of a textbook, and the other one's a bit more of kind of like a dictionary, if you know what I mean. So yes, the ascendant point really is really important, and it's not just about, it's also kind of like how we dress ourselves. So somebody just thinking, so Taurus ascendant is going to go for picking usually comfortable clothing, very sometimes quite feminine, because it's a Venus ruled sign, but I think that function usually, you could say maybe for the earth signs there's a sense of function over fashion, but actually again it might be a case of with a Venus ruled sign on the ascendant, and it, like Taurus, there may be an element of fashion involved, because Venus is very good at knowing how to present herself. I'm just thinking of the Taurians I know that love like woolly heavy knits and warm jumpers in the winter that are like, you can see like the textures. They're a very sensual sign. And then you've got like the kind of the Sagittarian almost dressing like a teacher or wearing sort of sporty clothes, the elbow patches, that kind of geography teacher look maybe, that kind of Sagittarian higher education type, or like the football jerseys and things like that as well. That's quite a Saggy type thing. Usually I can spot a Virgo because they're usually quite dressed in, like thinking about like muted tones and things like that. They're not usually too leery and out there. Obviously, if they've got Venus or Mercury maybe in Leo, it might be a different story. But the ascendant usually does describe, wearing something a bit more, it's much more your style. I think I kind of fluctuate between Capricorn style, which is quite smart, Scorpio moon, who just likes to wear quite a lot of dark colours so they can blend in, and then dressing like a teenager, wearing like some nice jeans and some Converse trainers. Maybe not teenagers these days, because I don't know if I'm in touch with fashion or not, but I probably dress sometimes a bit younger, and that can be the youthfulness of like a Gemini ascendant. Aries is also quite a youthful ascendant sign. So think about your ascendant, think about what you wear when you open your wardrobe. What sort of stuff do you have in there? And what kind of stuff do you do to dress yourself up? Are you somebody, ladies, do you like to wear, pretty things like rings and bracelets and whatever? Gents, do you like that too? What's going on with your rising sign? Or are you somebody who kind of is quite basic and quite simplistic in what you like to wear? Are you somebody that grows and paints your nails and spends a lot on makeup? This is all very much about the ascendant, and kind of not necessarily beautifying doesn't have to be part of the ascendant, but it's definitely about your appearance, and the first impressions you make on others as well. So it's kind of like what people meet in you, and when you're nervous, usually the ascendant sign will take over and go on autopilot for you. So often when people first meet me, and maybe when you're listening to this podcast, you'll agree, I'm a chatty person, and when people first meet me, if I'm nervous, I'll just talk and talk and talk. If I'm able to just slip back into a crowd and not be seen like an 8th house sun Scorpio moon can do, then that's quite good. But if I do get put in the spotlight and I have to talk to people or anything, I can end up talking way too much, and people probably go away thinking, oh, bloody hell, she chats, didn't she? So the ascendant is very interesting, and like I said, it is very much it feeds into the 7th house because it's the opposite. So with the ascendant and descendant axis, and like I said, with an axis, just like the nodal axis, just like the AC, DC, ascendant, descendant, just like the midheaven and the IC, we've got the lunar, when you've got an opposition really in the chart, it's a kind of axis that you can't impact one side without impacting the other, like a seesaw. It's like a seesaw. So just some pointers for you. So the ascendant and descendant is kind of like the east versus the west, the I versus the we, the self versus the not self, and competition versus cooperation. And then you've got boys versus girls. I mean, competition versus cooperation, because Mars would, Mars is... the ascendant is quite an Aries Mars point in the chart, where it is very much about ourself and what we want. And then the seventh house is about other people and what they want. So there's a sense of competition with the first house. And if you have a lot of planets in the first house or around the first house, there is a sense of Ariesness, whether or not, you've got like a Pisces on the ascendant, or, something like Virgo that isn't particularly Aries at all. But there can be a striving to be better, somebody who is quite goal driven, and wants to achieve and come first. And then, opposite that, you've got the descendant, which is the point that's ruled by Venus, the Libra point, really, where we have this sense of cooperating with others, and that Venusian sense of diplomacy and moderation, or attempting to moderate anyway. Sometimes when you've got a Venus placement, it can be where we overindulge. But there is that seesaw of trying to find the balance. So there's people who maybe have their sun setting in the chart, so their identity would be very much tied up with seventh house issues, with having involvement with other people. Relationships would be very, very important to somebody with sun in the seventh house or sun on the descendant, as opposed to somebody who has sun rising, who, you could argue and say that's egocentric. You could say that it's somebody who's very self-absorbed, but that doesn't mean you're self-absorbed. It just means that perhaps you have a very clear sense of your own identity, and that actually, that it's not a crime to want to put yourself first for things. You could almost argue that sun in the first house is somebody who might understand the importance of self-care. Somebody with sun in the seventh house might, not perhaps focus on self-care and put other people before themselves quite a lot of the time. There's always pros and cons to different places where you find planets. However, when you do find an angular planet, so if you do have like your sun rising, if you've got Neptune rising, any of the planets rising, let's think Angelina Jolie. So she's got Venus rising in Cancer. That planet that is on the ascendant gets magnified through. I kind of think of the rising sign as a little bit like refraction. When you look at the light hitting that little pyramid, like the Pink Floyd cover, and suddenly there's this beautiful rainbow that comes out. I think of the ascendant like that. It's the light hitting, because we know the ascendant is where the sun rises on the eastern horizon. But let's just pretend that the eastern horizon is like a prism, and we have this light hitting it, and suddenly this rainbow fills the chart, but it's coloured. If a planet gets in the way, and so let's say we do have planets in the first house and rising. So for Angelina Jolie, for example, Venus happened to be rising in her chart when she was born. And there's this beautiful Venusian rainbow that's cast over the entire chart. This planet is so important, and it influences everything. And we would have to, we know lots about Angelina Jolie from what we read about her, but actually, we know she's been married, 3 times? I think Johnny Lee Miller, what's his name? Billy Bob Thornton, and Brad Pitt. So relationships, that Venusian relationship thing is very important to her. And has played a big role in her life. But actually, she is just so stunningly beautiful. That Venus rising is she's goddess-like. She is goddess-like. So she has that Venusian Aphrodite goddess essence about her. Yes, there are other aspects to her chart. Yes, she's got stuff going on. What's she got on her midheaven? Mars, Jupiter, Moon, Mars, Jupiter in Aries. So she's got a lot of stuff, up there, very visible, high in the chart. And, so that I'm guessing would put opposite all that stuff. I don't know if that's on, I think it's on the midheaven. I'm just doing this from memory, by the way. but her IC then would be Venus ruled, because it would be opposite Aries, so it would be Libra. So again, home for her, family would be important, her roots. We know that she has a complex relationship with her father. It just, when you start understanding the houses, for me, having the houses really add a level of context to the chart. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's really hard to explain. You can look at the chart, you can look at where the planets are in the signs, but without the houses, for me, there's a sense that you can't quite, it removes a level of interpretation. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just not as, I don't know, it's just not as clear to interpret. It makes it a little bit muddier for me. It almost changes the language of the chart. So having a birth time is really, really important, helpful. And, if you don't have a birth time, you can still cast a whole sign chart, so that, the 0 degrees of whichever sign is on the ascendant. So if you had a rough idea that you were born between, this time and that time, and it was probably, like Aries rising, then you can just put Aries on the ascendant, and that's fine. And you can perfect it a bit more. But if you don't have a clue at all, some people just don't know, it can be really difficult. In those cases, I would say it might be useful to just cast a chart for either midday or for sunrise and put the sun on the ascendant. You won't get that added dimension of your actual ascendant, but it would still be a useful way for you to look at the chart. Whenever planets get in the way of this beautiful refracting rainbow prism that I like to think of as the ascendant, they really do get involved. Somebody with like Pluto and Uranus around the first house. I think Nigel Farage, who was the UKIP, I don't even know what you would call him. He was like the head of the UKIP party in the United Kingdom and has gone to represent, I don't know if he's still there anymore, but he went to Germany to represent the UK during the Brexit talks. He has Pluto Uranus rising, and that's a very provocative rising combination. Happen to know somebody else who has Pluto and Uranus rising in Virgo and has her sun setting in Pisces, and she's an absolutely lovely human being. She's really, really nice. Her sun being in the 7th house, she ends up very much wrapped up in relationships with people who kind of oppress her self-expression. She's been single for quite a while now, because she understands that actually being involved in relationships like that, she never is truly happy, because she doesn't really get to be who she truly is. And that Pluto Uranus has to be weird and wacky, and it has to be very she has to express her truth and very authentic. So it's interesting combinations. Neptune rising again can be incredibly dreamy, creative. Dance can be important, and that kind of thing. And just this sense of when you meet people, they might see what they want in you. Marilyn Monroe with her Neptune in the 1st house. I think we talked about her when we talked about, did we talk about Neptune with Marilyn Monroe? I think we might have done. And just how people see what they want in her. If you've got Neptune in the 7th, like I do, you might have to work on boundaries in relationship. You might have to work on, not being too open to other people's nonsense. That's a constant work in progress for me. I'm always working on that Neptune stuff. It's really tough. Neptune's tough for a Capricorn. It's tough enough anyway, but I think when you're a Capricorn, or a Saturnian type, you need, boundaries are important, and it can feel like you're being mean if you establish them. Other people can make you feel like you're being mean. You should never listen to other people. Just be you. The houses, the 1st and the 7th house, are so key in our kind of relationship building and personal understanding. Again, back to my little list I was going through. So we've got boys versus girls, that Mars versus Venus thing. There's the fire versus air feeling about these houses. It doesn't mean that if you've got Cancer rising in Capricorn setting that you would necessarily read that as a fire versus air, because that's earth and water. However, there is that kind of duality about the first and the seventh house, the fire being that kind of that spark of individuality versus that airy social quality, which really likes to relate and connect with other people. So really we've got our personality aspects that we integrate versus the qualities that we project in the houses. And what we find, so with the seventh house, I think we can look at this as what we find in ourselves after finding it in others. So have you ever been in a relationship where somebody introduced you to some music you'd never heard of before, maybe even a whole new genre, and you suddenly realise how much you love that genre, and it was like through that person that introduced it to you? And not just music, but just all sorts of things about yourself. Like maybe you never realised quite how much you love to bake until you met that person who taught you how to bake a certain thing, and suddenly you were just baking everything. There's just things that we learn about ourselves, and it doesn't necessarily have to be glaringly obvious stuff as well. So with the seventh house, we do project a lot of our own personal qualities onto other people. The things that we don't like about ourselves. So if you ever looked at someone and thought, this is a really horrible thing to have to learn, but it's just the truth. Looking at someone and thinking, I don't like the way she does, she does this, that, and the other. I don't really like the way that I've seen her, running off with a guy just after they broke up. She broke up with her long-term boyfriend, something like that. And like really judging harshly somebody and thinking, I hate that person, I hate them for this reason, or I hate them for that reason. There are aspects about that person that reflect something deep within you that you perhaps, without really knowing, there are elements of your own personality that would actually perhaps do those sorts of things. I'm not saying this on a grand scale. I'm not saying that every single one of us who hates, I don't know, somebody like Jimmy Savile, for example, that evil, prolific sex offender and paedophile. I'm not saying that we look at him and we hate him and that's it, we've all got that in our chart. However, it would be argued to say that any crime committed by one human being, if it's never been committed before and it finally gets something gets committed by a human being, it makes it a human act and capable of any human being. So there is that to be said. However, as far as projection goes in relationships, if there's somebody you find you just really don't like, there's something about them that it just really pisses you off, you have to kind of acknowledge to an extent that there is something triggering you. That person is able to trigger you, and that person is able to maybe force you to look within and ask yourself questions about yourself and whether or not you think you'd ever be capable of doing something like that, or what it is exactly that you don't like about that, and whether or not you can make peace with that kind of thing. I was saying in the previous episode how I just used to think that I didn't like Sagittarius. I'm in a relationship with a Sagittarius now, and it's kind of a big deal. It's like, it's going well, and I consider this guy to be my life partner. And my dad is a Sag as well, and I kind of maybe wonder if that was part of my thing. I didn't have a great relationship with him. Not that I don't anymore. I think when you're a girl growing up, you don't always have the best relationship with your dad, because there's a point where there's a bit of like teenage angst and being a teenage girl and all that annoying stuff that I went through. So I think it can be hard sometimes for a dad to relate to his daughter at certain points. And I suppose that may be why I looked at that and thought, it's a Sagittarius thing. Actually, no, it's more of a sense of, there's a lot about Sagittarius that I love. That was just a period of misunderstanding, perhaps. And there's a lot about Sagittarians, they're the teacher, and the Gemini Ascendant is the student. There's a lot of really great things that you can learn through this duality, this polarity, this axis. So, yes, we do find things in ourselves after finding them through others, whether it's through extreme yuck, disgusting, I don't like that person, or if it's an extreme admiration and almost putting someone on a pedestal. I mean, you could argue this for the midheaven, but actually I'm going to say this for any of the oppositions in the chart. think about somebody, I think I've said this before, think about somebody that you really admire. Think about somebody that you absolutely think that they are great at what they do. Just anybody you can imagine who you think, I want to be like that person. Write down 3 things that you admire about them, and really think about that for a moment and really focus on like pulling out what really inspires you about this person. And then you have to recognize the fact that actually everything that you recognize in that person that you admire is something you are capable of and is within you too. So it works that way too. We can find wonderful things about ourselves through our relationships with other people. I feel like I've kind of gone on about the ascendant. The descendant as well is very much tied up with that, and relationships, marriage, where we kind of it's where individuality kind of ends. I'm not saying that someone with sun in the 7th or anything is going to always be in a relationship. They might not, and they're not going to be an individual. However, interacting with others is really key for them. And it's definitely not a house of individuality, whereas the first house is the house of individuality. It's who we are, our personality, our perspective, the way we see the world, versus being with other people, learning through their perspective, learning through the lessons that they bring to us. And anywhere you see a kind of like an opposition in the chart, so if we look at full moons, that's a sun and moon opposition, or if we look at the lunar nodes, they are a calculated point which are exactly opposite each other. Anywhere we've got that kind of opposition going on, it immediately brings in the element of a relationship about it. So there will always be yourself and somebody else. There will always be a sense of understanding through kind of separation. So not necessarily splitting up, as it, for example, but as kind of objective versus subjective perspective, which brought together can enlighten you and help you to understand the world from a removed perspective from your own. Because when I said about a sun rising in the first house being egocentric potentially, yes, it can be that you are very self focused and looking at what you want from the world, but actually it can be a sense of having a removed perspective can be more of a challenge for somebody like that. Not necessarily always, but there is a sense of the world kind of being it's a place where you are very focused on what you want to achieve and what you want to do, and maybe compromise doesn't always come into it for you. Whereas the descendant axis, which is opposite the first house, whether or not we like it, every time we step out and we speak to another person, we are inviting that opposition, and we are inviting that that duality, that experience of others. And the counselling skills teacher that I had, who really came out with some really great stories about counselling and about interactions with other people, she said that relationships are the vehicle for change. And I 100% wholeheartedly hung on to that statement. It inspired such a great thought process in me. To think that every single relationship you've ever had, whether it's a really positive, helpful one, or whether it's a really challenging and counterproductive kind of relationship, every single kind of relationship that we have in our life teaches us about ourselves. It teaches us about, for example, my first relationship that I had, my first long-term relationship with the guy that was not so great. He taught me a lot about what I don't want in a relationship. He taught me a lot about what I'm prepared to put up with. And you come away from every relationship and every experience with an understanding of what you're prepared to continue through your life doing with those new lessons that you've learned. The relationships being the vehicle for change. It's other people can bring in experiences into your world which actually trigger a reaction in you that you didn't think was who you were. You know, things can be drawn out of you through other people that can shock and surprise you. So yeah, I just find I think that the longer I go on, like astrology is a great tool for self understanding and self exploration. The self work is key, as my friend Fernanda was saying in our recent chat. Self work is so important, and I completely agree, and we shouldn't ignore that. However, relationships are also a fantastic tool for learning about ourselves. Never ever try to blame other people for something that you did. I could blame other people and say, "Oh, I wasted time with that guy. He wasted my time." I was there. I stayed. I was there for a long time. The reason I stayed was because I hadn't learned the lessons I needed to learn. I hadn't found my voice. I didn't know about my own personal inner strength. And this is the type of thing where you have to kind of recognize the lessons and the value in even some of the more difficult aspects of our relational, our relationship experiences and our relational kind of lives. So that's kind of it. Another book that I would recommend as well, just in case you didn't catch the last episode, was The 12 Houses by Howard Susportus, which is a book specifically focused on the houses, and it's quite a big book, and it's really interesting. It's really thorough, a really great book for you to explore when looking at your chart and your friends' charts and your family's charts. And another one that's really good, I've just started really kind of picking up and looking at, is The Planets in Houses by Robert Palettia, Pelletier. And this book is a kind of another cookbook. It's a little bit like the Planets in Transit and the Planets in Aspects book, which I've recommended. And this one even has combinations for like your sun sign in one house and your moon sign in another. All sorts of things. It's a really, really good little book. Happened to pick it up at a conference, probably second-hand, well, definitely second-hand, it's not a brand new one. And I don't think I paid a lot of money for it. This one, at the back, it's got a sticker saying £6.95. Now, I don't even think I probably paid that for it. Who knows? I can't remember. A lot of my books are second-hand, but that's a great one. But, yeah, so just thinking about the fact that the Ascendant is the Eastern horizon and the Descendant is the Western horizon. There's another way of looking at this as anything on the eastern side of the chart, any planets on the eastern side of the chart tend to be where we look at the world as somewhere that we have an impact. Life is participatory. We participate and we have an impact on life through our actions and what we do. Whereas those with planets on the western side of the chart generally have a sense of more life kind of happens to them. And I'm not saying it's like a defeatist kind of attitude. It can be that they're open more to synchronicities more, and not being so self-directed and allowing life to occur and them to participate in life through that instead of directly affecting it. So there's almost like this, if I can say it in my own language, the first, the eastern side is where we are the directors of our own film, whereas the western side of the chart, it's kind of, we got that universal input where we just kind of have faith in some things. Things happen, we go with the flow, and there's a kind of almost we're taking part, but we're not actually directing. So do you have a lot of Western planets, and do you feel like there's more of a universal input as opposed to you being the driver of this vehicle, or do you have a mostly Eastern emphasis on your chart, so everything on the left side, and kind of feeling like actually you're more of a driver, you make the choices, life is what you make of it? I'd be curious to hear that. And I did actually calculate a bunch of charts. Let's go and have a look and see where I've put them. Before I do that, let's have a look at some of the quotes that I found. We've got knowing me, knowing you, ABBA or Alan Partridge, depending on what you're interested in. Here's a quote. This is about the kind of the first to the seventh house. Self-love is not selfish. You cannot truly love another until you know how to love yourself. Love is a two-way street, constantly under construction. Good one. That's by Carol Bryant. Another one here. I often stood in front of the mirror alone, wondering how ugly a person could get. I included that quote because, and this is Charles Bukowski, Ham on Rye. I included that because the seventh house is like a mirror. And if we think about Venus being the kind of, it looks like the vanity glass, the vanity mirror, being the ruler of Libra, who kind of is that seventh house area essence. There is a sense of mirror about the seventh house. Here we are. I couldn't imagine that I'd ever fall in love again like I had with Gideon. For better or worse, he was my soulmate, the other half of me. In many ways, he was my reflection. There we go, another reflection quote. And here we have another one, which maybe is more of a first house emphasis. Don't be a prisoner of the past, be a pioneer of the future. You could argue that that's more of like a sun-moon opposition, but actually I do like the idea of being your own personal pioneer, which is a very first house kind of essence. So those are some of the quotes, and let me just go in and find my wee little charts that I cast for my charts that I cast. I do the worst Scottish accent. That was actually supposed to be Scottish. Here we are. So we've got some charts to look at now. Let's look at Erica. What's Erica got? Oh my goodness, how funny! I just randomly picked Erica, and Erica. Oh my goodness! So I've talked about Erica. You probably already relate to what I've been talking about because you have a Gemini ascendant. So you have Sagittarius on your descendant, and you have Jupiter and Uranus very close to your descendant, which I'm afraid means you probably do attract some quite quirky people. Aquarius on the relationship cusp, on the relationship house cusp, usually indicates somebody who is definitely not conventional. Your relationships probably aren't particularly conventional, but they're probably incredibly fulfilling because having Jupiter and Uranus together sitting there on the seventh house cusp probably describes relationships which are full of alternative ideas and meaningful connections. And that's not just your relationships in romantic senses, it's also your relationships in in many senses. It kind of describes the kind of people you're going to attract. So people that you attract are going to be the types that have something to teach you. And being the Gemini ascendant that you are, you're probably all ears and very thirsty for knowledge and very curious to know more. And somebody who loves to have their eyes open to the different avenues and different perspectives in life, the different weighing up your options. You also have Mercury in Aquarius sitting in your ninth house. Again, another Sagittarian message here, because the ninth house is Sagittarius / Jupiter house by kind of traditional association. Doesn't mean that the house is ruled by Sagittarius or Jupiter, but it has that kind of essence about it. So you've got Mercury sitting up there in your ninth house, which is kind of about higher education. It's about seeking a meaningful practice sometimes. It could be spirituality or religion that you look for in order to provide that sense of meaning. Perhaps you like to speak to lots of other people about expanding your mind, because this is a expansive position for Mercury to be, the communication planet, the brain planet, the sun's PA, sitting in that ninth house. It's thirsty for knowledge, and probably more specific knowledge than just general that Gemini usually goes for. Having an opportunity to drink up a subject that really sparks that inspirational flame of knowledge within you. So whether you went to university or not, possibly not, because it's Aquarius on that ninth house cusp. So if you did do something, it may have been distance learning, or doing something unconventional, not your typical course. It could be that you did something like scientific, or something that requires an idea, like a conceptual way of thinking, because Mercury in Aquarius is very conceptual. But, you know, I think obviously submitting your chart to an astrology podcast, you're definitely going to be open to very alternative ideas. And you probably could take your studies with astrology very far with having that ninth house placement. It's also the house of broadcasting and publishing as well. So possibly you may be somebody who likes to write, has a blog maybe, or is considering having a blog. And it's on the midheaven too. So it puts you, you know, as Mercury being your chart ruler and your first house ruler being Mercury, sitting right up there on the ascendant, on the midheaven. So, you know, your time here, we've got 25th of February 1983 at 10:35 Eastern Standard Time in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So that's your, you know, if your birth chart is accurate, so let's say maybe it's like a minute or two out, but actually it's relatively accurate, you know, 10:35, then having your personal ascendant ruler, the chart ruler, on your midheaven means that you probably have a very specific idea of somebody who inspires you or who you look up to, somebody who you kind of admire, and their work has inspired you to honour perhaps some of their practices and what they value and what they do through the work that you do. And your work has to be something that expresses a bit of who you are, but at the same time is not going to be a typical run-of-the-mill type of work. Aquarius on the midheaven, your ruling planet Mercury in Aquarius, is going to be talking about things that are different. It's going to be slightly out of step with everybody else, so you're not quite in step with the fashions. You may be either a bit ahead or a little bit behind. You know, Aquarius can be quite technical, quite techy, yeah, there can. It's like I said, I can see somebody writing for a blog or doing something, definitely a little bit, probably a bit more mainstream now than it was before. I think that us Aquarian types are definitely having our moment now. So, and you've got Jupiter up there at the moment, transiting Jupiter, hanging around there too. So you're having probably relationships are opportunistic meetings with others are probably part of your experience at the moment, what's going on for you in life. Obviously lots of other things going on. We've got Mars currently transiting Gemini, going through your 12th house, so you may be I'd say take it a little bit easy. You may get a cold when it crosses your ascendant, but yeah, and so you've got this nice quite an airy ascendant. You've got an airy midheaven with your ruling planet sitting over there, and your relationships are signified by this Jupiter, Uranus sitting on the Descendant, but also you've got Neptune in that 7th house. Just like I was saying earlier, working on your boundaries can be hard. You know, with all this air in your chart, it's a very sociable, and you know, quite independent as well. And you've got that lovely Mars-Venus conjunction in your 10th house. There's a lot of emphasis on, I think, kind of like profession, but it's got to be the way you do it. It's got to be unique. It's your own way of doing things. You definitely, I'm not saying you're belligerent, but I think it's difficult for you to take orders from somebody else, especially you've got a Leo moon as well. And a Leo moon is, you know, sits quite low down in the chart actually. It's the lowest planet in the chart. But that Leo moon on the IC as well is a luxurious and a moon that kind of enjoys the finer things. It's very regal and royal, I would say. And then maybe there's a mindset there for you that is very, not saying that it's not like you think you're better than everybody else, but it's just that there's a real sense of self about this chart. I think there's a real sense of self and a real sense of individuality. And, you know, as I was talking about like Eastern and Western placements, you do have a fair amount of planets on the Western side. So I think that there is still, though you've got some planets on the Eastern side which could probably give you that sense of being self-directed and having that sense of self, there is still that sense of interaction with others, working with other people, and you know, not just working with other people, but just having, it's a very social aspect, but also that kind of taking your hands off the wheel of the car and allowing it to sometimes to just steer itself down that road when you come to that fork and you're not sure which path to take. That Gemini crossroads where you have to decide, am I going left or right? You might just leave it up to the universe to say, see which side the wheel steers to first, and then say, right, okay, I'm taking this road today. It's kind of like, I look at this chart as a bit of a life is an adventure, but there is a sense of, you don't like to rough it too much. The creature comforts do call you back home. That Leo moon is, it definitely feels a bit of a conflict with the rest of the more, like I don't know, there's leadership involved in this as well. It's not totally conflicting. There's lots of fire. It's quite a bit of air, not a lot of earth, and not a lot of water either. So this is quite a quick and fun chart, actually. A lot of air and a lot of fire is very motivated, self-motivated, social, very kind of gets a lot out of interactions with other people. So that's your chart. And do you know what? We didn't even look at your sun, your Pisces sun, which you could then look at that through the lens of that watery Pisces sun, and take all of that into consideration. And then, you've got that Pisces sun sitting in the 9th, very close to the 10th house as well, giving another nod to the importance of what you do for a living, and that kind of sense of ambition and I don't know, really, like that kind of, that public image. There is a real creative edge to what you do, and ultimately communicating something that is bigger than us, way bigger than us, perhaps doing work that involves every aspect that I've kind of highlighted, but in addition to that, actually is giving back in some way to humanity, and doing something of greater meaning. Enjoy your enjoy your Jupiter transit to your midheaven and your Mercury placement. He will be passing over once, I believe, and going into Pisces. Oh gosh, when's he going into Pisces? I think he's going in is it June or is it April? I don't even know. I was looking at someone's chart the other day. But he's coming back into Aquarius, so we'll get a little extra dose of that. So yeah, you've got a bit of Jupiterian abundance coming your way, and because you've got Jupiter setting in your chart, if you aren't in a relationship, there's a possibility you could meet somebody, and if not meeting somebody for romantic reasons, there's definitely an opportunity for you to have a kind of expansive and enlightening and meaningful experience with some of the people that you meet. Opportunity knocks, that's that kind of feeling. Okay, Erica, thank you for submitting your chart for the chat. If you guys have enjoyed the show, don't forget to put a review on iTunes or any of the platforms you're listening. If you can't review the podcast on the platforms that you're listening on, just sign up to, you can email me, stephanie@stelliumastrology.com. You can sign up to Patreon, and there's plenty of content going on there that will hopefully tickle your fancy. And, some early previews to the interviews I'm doing, and some of the astro chats that I'm doing. So definitely consider that. And if you haven't submitted your chart to this podcast and you would like me to look at it, I will get around to it. It does take me a while sometimes, but I will get there. All you have to do is sign up to my mailing list at stelliumastrology.com and fill out the application form, which comes through with your welcome email. So thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. I hope you are enjoying the weather improving. The daylight hours in the Northern Hemisphere are definitely getting longer, which is always a good thing for me. And I will speak to you next time about the 2nd and 8th house complex. Take care, you guys. Bye.